Morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name's Gail Izat and I'm Standard Life's Workplace Managing Director. It's great to be here today. We're looking forward to a really great discussion. We're probably going to spend around 40 to 45 minutes on the discussion with the panellists, and then we'll open up to Q&A. We'd really love to hear from everybody on the webinar. And there's three ways that you can get involved. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a raise your hand functionality. If you press that, we'll unmute your microphone and we'll bring you into the conversation. If you're shy about speaking on the webinar, then you can also type your question into the Q&A function. And finally, you can use the chat function, which you can also ask questions. Just make sure that you address that to all panelists and all members of the webinar so that we can all see the questions. So, as I said, it's great to be here today where we're going to try and share some insights about the impact of COVID-19 on financial wellness, in particular focusing on the over 50s. And I'm delighted to be joined by Sharon Smyth. Sharon heads up our marketing department in Ireland, and also delighted to be joined by Ross Matthews. Ross is Centrica's Pension and Benefits Director. So really diverse panel for what we hope is an interesting conversation. So as I said, today we're going to explore some of the key themes and trends about COVID and how this has impacted financial well-being, and in particular how that has impacted those over 50. We'll spend some time about how it's impacted people's preparation for retirement, but we're also going to broaden that discussion out to think about how people approach retirement, both from planning financially, but also how do they plan emotionally for that key life stage. And we'll also cover how member behaviour has changed over that period and what we can do to support people going through that critical phase. And I'm going to share some of the trends in pension member behaviour in the UK. Sharon's going to bring that Irish perspective about what's happening there, and really looking forward to hearing from Ross to share a bit of an employer perspective. So as I said, hopefully a diverse conversation. But before we kind of jump into the COVID impact, I guess I wanted to just pause and talk a little bit about some of the UK trends that sort of set the scene for some of the impacts that we're going to talk about. So retirement in the UK is changing, and we're seeing people have more choice, but we're also seeing people work longer and later in life. And if I think about auto-enrolment in the UK, it's been incredibly successful with about 10 million new pension savers. But up to 2015, most people would have converted their retirement savings into a guaranteed income through an annuity, with drawdown being really reserved for wealthier individuals. And in 2015, we saw the introduction of pension freedoms, and that rapidly increased the choice that members had and the control and access they had to their retirement savings, often as early as 55. And with auto-enrolment largely predicated on inertia, it became even more important to provide the right guidance and support at all life stages to prepare people for that critical retirement phase, which becomes more complex. And I guess some key concerns we had as an industry is that people can make irrevocable decisions at that stage that might have massive tax implications, or it might mean that their pot runs out too soon. So a critical stage that needs to be carefully supported, and actually very different from that potentially passive accumulation phase. Now, during the pandemic, support and guidance has become even more important, and we've seen a number of impacts with things like increased financial hardship, more volatility in markets. We've seen people's retirement choices changing, with some people choosing to retire later, some people choosing to retire sooner, and also an increased threat of pension scams. So, in terms of some of the key trends that we're going to explore today, and also we're going to look at what the trends are, but also what support is on offer. So there's kind of two main areas that we're going to talk about. The first is the impact on finances, which is obviously impacting people's attitude to retirement. But we're also then going to think about how are people thinking about and preparing for retirement, and what support is out there for them to get, and how has the pandemic impacted that? And there's some real, there's some sub-themes under that. So how do we think about retirement differently? The increase in financial hardship and vulnerability, how we've seen the digital engagement change over the pandemic, and is that going to be with us forever? And then finally, what the impact of moving to more virtual engagement. So I wanted to start on the impact on people's finances and what that means for their retirement plans. So I think we all know COVID has had a widespread and rapid impact on people's finances. So we looked at some research from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which showed that 1 in 5 people aged 52 and over reported that their overall financial situation was worse in June and July than it had been pre the pandemic. And they also found that 13% of people over 50 planned to alter their retirement plans, with 8% planning to retire later and 5% planning to retire earlier. And we've also seen an increase in people accessing their retirement funds to live on rather than spend. And as an industry, we need to consider that and the longer term impact that might have on people's pots running down sooner than expected. And then finally, the increased market volatility obviously impacts those close to retirement more, with them having less time to potentially their pots to recover from the impact of that market volatility. So a real number of sort of financial impacts on those over 50 approaching retirement. But Sharon, if I can turn to you first and say, what have you seen COVID impact in terms of both their finances and how they're thinking about retirement?
Yeah, sure. In the Irish market, we run a quarterly survey, the Second Life study, and that's nationally representative of 1,000 Irish adults. And we talk to them about their behaviours and attitudes towards life savings products, focusing particularly on pensions and retirement, where we specialise. And since March with those surveys, we've absolutely seen an impact from COVID. So a third of our respondents work for big or private firms where they feel like their employer is likely to be able to continue to pay them through the pandemic. So that group of people are in a really positive position. For a lot of them, the cost of living is down from working from home. And for those people, they have more money to save. So we're seeing about 4% of those people actually increase their pension contributions. At the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing a lot of people put money into demand deposit accounts, about 66% of those people. And then in the middle, of course, we have about 47% of people who are investing more in DIY at home in their gardens. And I think what really struck me, particularly in our last survey, I think all of us, our lives have been hugely impacted by COVID and by lockdowns. And it's really changed the way we live our lives. That for most people has had both positive and negative impacts. When we're talking today about the over 50s, the good news is that for the over 50s, they're more likely to have had a positive experience of this new way of living compared to millennials who are worst hit. And we're seeing that these new ways of living our lives and interacting with each other is having an impact on how people view retirement. And again, there's positives and negatives. So when we talk to the Irish public and we ask them how their change in living patterns has impacted their view on their future retirement, for 89%, they have at least some increased positive view. And for 70%, they have at least some negative view. The positive view tends to come from, in almost half cases, from just a slower, more relaxed pace of life, from enjoying simple activities and connecting again with family, friends and neighbours. On the negative side, we see a third of people really feeling an impact from the loss of social interaction that we get from the workplace, a loss of structure and routine in their lives. For a quarter of people, they're feeling a loss of sense of purpose. And for a fifth of people, a complete loss of self-identity. So we know that for a lot of people, their view of themselves is very closely wrapped with their working life. So Gail, absolutely linking with what you said there, that the figures I thought were really interesting about, you said that 8% of people I think are delaying retirement and 5% approaching it early. Anecdotally, we very much hear that feedback through advisors and our business managers, where we're seeing some people enjoying this new way of life, and embracing a retirement that they never could have envisaged, maybe leaving that working world. But for other people, there's huge fear about what that means. Who am I if I don't get up in the morning and go to work? And for those people, they're delaying it. Either way, I mean, I think some small good that has come from this time is that people maybe have had a chance to think about what that life would be if we were plucked from our working world and retired without a plan. And hopefully that will push people on to think about it in a different way.
Thanks for that, Sharon. That's really interesting. I guess, Ross, turning to you in terms of from a Centrica and employer perspective, what have you seen through the period, and what kind of challenges have your employees had?
Thanks, Gail, and good morning, everybody. So I think the first point to know is how has it impacted us as an organisation? I mean, hopefully many of you are familiar with Centrica and what we do, but we've been able to focus on supporting our customers, and in particular play a vital role for vulnerable customers, keeping their hot water and heating on throughout lockdown, and continuing importantly throughout winter now. So we're proud that we've been able to do that, and we've been able to sort of weather the storm from a financial point of view as well. And what that's meant is, the one thing an employer can do, right, is to try and ensure that you continue to provide people with an income. You continue to provide people with a job and an income, and therefore there's certainty of being able to continue retirement savings. So yes, we've used the furlough scheme, but we've been able to maintain full pay and benefits throughout this year, and lockdown and COVID, etc. So what that means, it's to Sharon's point about people who work for large organisations might be in a more fortunate place if they've got that level of certainty. So that's a positive message. And then in terms of I suppose just a bit on the ways of working, just picking up Sharon's point about we've had to totally change the ways of working, doing a lot more remotely, ordering thousands of laptops so that contact centre colleagues can take calls from their kitchens, from their sofas, from their bedrooms, etc. And actually a lot of people embrace that, but we need to be mindful of there's some people who aren't easily adaptable to that new ways of working, and their social life may be surrounding work and colleagues, so have to build into that. In terms of from a financial planning point of view and retirement point of view, we haven't seen as yet any sort of changes in people's retirement plans, and we'd already had a lot of our pensions information online so we built a sort of central pensions hub, so already set up for engaging remotely. There are a couple of things we sort of done to help colleagues through these times. Number one, which Gail already talked about market volatility. So just putting some communications out there to remind people that markets were volatile, in particular around March, April time this year, and to remind people it's a long-term investment in pensions, and therefore to no knee-jerk reactions, etc. Just to help people understand about the investments in case they're worried. And then secondly, expression of wish forms, because our death benefits are payable through the pension scheme, and therefore it's important to remind people of the importance of filling out those forms. So we can't get away from that, and it's the times we live in, it's very important that people fill those in. Just one voice on behalf of employers. There will be other companies out there who unfortunately may need to lay off staff as we go through this go through the pandemic and hopefully come out the other side. A lot's been made in the press of younger colleagues and unemployment about younger people, but I think we should recognise that there are colleagues, if we're talking here today about over 50s, that may impact them, who may not feel like they have the opportunity to reskill and retrain. And we should recognise the importance that an older workforce brings to employers with their diversity and their skill set and their experience. So I suppose, going forward, I hope that employers bring in more older colleagues, because they may have to bridge an income gap between now and when they're planning to retire.
Great. Thanks, Ross. And there's a number of topics I think that we're gonna pick up. So particularly, we're gonna pick up that digital and virtual and how that's changed how we work. Sharon, I'm really fascinated by some of the things you talked about changing how we think about retirement. So I think obviously we said that the main challenge in that accumulation phase is inertia and getting people to engage and thinking ahead. And I guess what I hadn't thought about is actually that, COVID might be a proxy for retirement, and actually that might be a way to get people to think differently about what retirement's going to be like. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing in that space?
Yeah, I'd love to. There's two main bodies of work that we're doing to try and help people in this area. The first stems from the fact that we really recognize that people aren't engaging with their pensions. They don't think positively about terms like pension and retirement. So about three years ago, we started on this journey to try and change the narrative and change the language in an effort to get people to engage more. So we started instead to refer to retirement as your second life. So your second life is your life in retirement, after your traditional 9 to 5 is finished, after the kids are raised and the mortgage is paid, where you get to live the life that you really always dreamed of living. And we started a content series where we met with incredible, inspiring second lifers who are doing amazing things with their retirement. And we started to promote those videos and just start to show people, like, I think we can have a vision in our heads of retirees, and we tend to default to our grandparents' generation. Our retirees are absolutely incredible characters who are a big part, kind of as Ross said, of the working world as well. And we know that retirement is changing. In the past, maybe there was a view that you worked 40 years and retired. Now we know people will take 4 or 5 attempts to wind down work and continue to step back. So Second Life has shown an increased engagement where we're seeing people in the Irish market use this language, and customers and advisors talking in these terms now and talking about retirement in a different way. The other thing we did in that space is we developed a fact find for retirement. So we're all well used, whether we're applying for a current account, a mortgage, a pension, investment, we're really well used to filling out financial fact finds. But we recognise that while people are engaging maybe in a pension and have some sort of pension arrangement, in 54% of cases in Ireland, people have a private pension arrangement, they're not really considering those other elements, kind of socially and personally, how you'll be impacted by retirement. So we developed the Second Life questionnaire. It's a really simple tool that has 8 questions designed to get people talking about some of those other elements of retirement, like who will you retire with? What kind of social network do you have? How closely linked is that to your working life, and how strong will your social connection and social circle be in retirement? In retirement, we'll each have an extra 2,000 hours every year. And just let that settle in for a second. And I'm sure all of the people that are joining us today, well, great. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are really excited about that. And Gail, you might straight away jump to how you would spend that time and what you would do with those hours. There are other people that are absolutely daunted and terrified by the prospects of having to fill 2,000 hours. So in the Second Life questionnaire, we get people, just to fill out a really simple list of making sure that with our spouses, with our family, with our closest friends, that we're discussing these things and making sure that it's not something that you have to deal with on your own at point of retirement. I mean, we see in the Irish market through our surveys that 60% of people have never had a conversation with their family or friends about their retirement planning. So we're really trying to encourage people to think about what life might be like in retirement. And if you can start to let that settle into your subconscious and really start to envisage that, then hopefully the financial plan will start to follow. And the second thing we're doing in this space, we actually just launched it this day last week. We recognize that most of us, through our education, we had an opportunity to work with a career guidance counsellor, somebody that helped us identify our talents and help us work out where we might fit in the world and point us in a certain direction. But as we go through our careers, we don't really have that kind of support. And often we meet retirees who tell us they don't really know what they want to do when they retire, when they grow up. So we invented a brand new job, and in Standard Life last Friday, we announced that we have hired the first ever end of career guidance counsellor. So this is someone whose job it is, alongside their financial advisor, to help people retire in a really healthy way, to help them deal with those non-financial aspects, the personal and emotional impacts of retirement, and help them unlock the vast talents that they have. We see people at retirement who have still a huge amount to give back to their communities and to the working world, and we want to help people unlock that and live life in retirement with a sense of purpose.
Yeah, no, I think, Sharon, it's such a great point. And I think too often, and I do want to talk a little bit about the financial planning side, because I think that is key. And actually, with some of the complexity we talked about, it's important that we ramp up that support to think about the financial planning. But I think stepping back and looking at it more holistically is just, it's probably it is a key way that maybe we can address that engagement point, because if you can envisage a positive future that you feel prepared for, then perhaps you're more willing to engage with something rather than potentially be distracted by shorter term objectives.
We hope so.
But on the point, I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we do. So we recognise that this over 50 and approaching retirement is a key stage in that financial planning. So absolutely, we'll try and wrap a lot more support around that. And some of the ways that we do that is, I guess first and foremost, we use some investment journeys that are quite simple for people to understand, that align to their goals. And we're delighted that the FCA confirmed that as an approach in their investment pathways regulation. Given we launched these post-financial, the pensions freedoms, we've got around 5 years of member behaviour that we've used to iterate our proposition to make sure that we're offering the right support to people who are drawing down from their savings pot. So that's the first one, and we find, I'll talk a little bit about in-scheme drawdown in a moment, and we find that those journeys are really popular. I guess the second one is about milestone communication on birthdays, and again we were pleased to see that the FCA have mandated that, and I'll talk a little bit later about, I think engagement means that you need to communicate across all channels, digital, talking to people, but also important in some of these written communications. But also in terms of tools, so again, people like to use tools. So again, we have a range of tools, but one of them that we find is helpful is we've got an in-scheme drawdown review tool, and that will nudge people to think about whether they're invested in the right funds and whether their funds are going to last for long enough. And finally, we'll look at whether members' behaviour matches what they set out in their drawdown behaviour. And if that looks different, then we'll nudge them to say, are you invested in the right have you got the right investment solution for your final objectives? And I think the point you made about, and that we've talked about, retirement not being an end state, it's not an end destination anymore. We're definitely seeing an increase in people accessing their pensions, but also continuing to save. And that's where solutions like in-scheme drawdown can be really helpful, because it allows people to continue to save, but access their pension savings. But most importantly, they can look at that together in their mobile app, their dashboard, or their annual statements. And I think, as I said, we launched in-scheme drawdown for our Master Trust members recently, and we've seen people make use of all of the flexibility, I think, which shows that people have differing needs. But as I said, that the guided journeys on investments, we find around 95% of people opting to use those, which again think underlines that people want simple and easy to understand solutions. But I think, we've talked, I guess, with your point, Sharon, that financial choices at retirement are more potentially wider, and therefore that brings complexity. And how you retire and live your life has multiple options and choices, and also that we need to consider the emotional, physical and financial factors as we approach retirement. But Ross, that's covered quite a lot of ground, but can you give us the employer view on how you support people approaching retirement?
Yeah, and there's probably there's 3 key points I sort of want to make here. First of all, building on some of the things which yourself and Sharon highlight about, there is no such thing as a cliff edge retirement, that you work to a certain age and that's it, and then you move into something in retirement. It's very much, a phased level of thinking, and then a phased approach for phasing down your work. And we sort of recognise that at Centrica, and so we continually try and look at the ways of working. And for those, approaching retirement age, over 50s, over 60s, look at how can we keep them in the workforce, because they're still able to provide valuable skill set, a lot of experience, to help to train up other colleagues as well, but give them a bit more flexibility. So perhaps they want to do a slightly different role, work more flexibly, work different hours. For some, they may have carer needs, which they need to focus on, or they may be looking after grandchildren, which provide vital support for their children, etc. So recognising that and working more flexibly to suit their needs, which helps us retain them in the business, suit our business needs, and then also coupling that, using the new pension freedoms, etc., to allow people to then access some of their retirement funds while still having an income from work to be best of both worlds. And over time, that can phase down, and so they feel more comfortable going into that sort of retirement phase. That's point number one. In terms of point number two, in terms of what do we do to support people approaching retirement? So we still have a large portion of colleagues who are in a defined benefit scheme. So for those individuals, we have in place some IFA support at retirement and funded for by the company, because it's obviously a complex decision and a life-changing one. So we want to make sure they have the right support in place to help them with those decisions. And of course, at the moment, all that's on, virtually, done virtually over the phone. For those, a large portion in the defined contribution schemes, a lot of the support we provide is online. We built a centralised pension hub, which provides all the information they need, and recognise probably a lot of them, a large portion of their pension savings may fit elsewhere outside of Centrica. And then the final point I wanted to make, which Sharon touched on, was about changing the narrative slightly. Those of us who've worked in pensions for many years realise it can get complicated very quickly. So how do we engage with people in a very simple, concise way? And you'll know that the best thing you can do is engage in pensions early and save early. So the more you put in, the more you get out. So for some, I say it for younger colleagues, but I think it affects older colleagues as well, to make them realise the value of having a pension scheme from your employer and value of the contributions, because some people will be thinking about putting their money elsewhere. So for example, the way we have our double match pension contributions in our scheme, if you put in £3.40, £15 gets put into your pension savings. Tell me a savings account which does that. What's the catch? You can't touch it till you're 55. Just changing the narrative slightly to think about it in a slightly different way. So there's various things and little nudges you can do, but our view is keep it simple and at a high level.
No, thanks, Ross. And I think, as I say, this how do you engage people, and we've got a question about how do you do behavioural change in this phase, and I guess my answer to that is it's really hard. It's really hard, and you actually need to do a number of different things. And I don't think we're great at it yet. And actually, I can see there's space for innovation and further progress in that state in that stage. But it looks like a wealth of support available, and I guess that's one of the key advantages of being a large employer. But I'm going to move. I'll move our conversation on a little bit, potentially back to COVID and how that's impacting people. And I wanted to explore this theme of vulnerability. So we've seen COVID has exacerbated vulnerability, both physical, financial, and mental. And I just wanted to quote some stats with some research. So the Standard Life Foundation commissioned research with YouGov, and they estimate that about 6.25 million households in the UK are living with reduced incomes with a heightened risk of financial difficulties. And also the Money and Pensions Advice Service also highlighted that 22% of adults in the UK have less than £100 in savings. So I think that shows financial hardship is definitely on the increase. But also we saw volatile markets in March and April, which meant that people were really worried about their long-term savings and what the impact that was going to have. So at Standard Life, we did a number of things to support people through that uncertainty, but also more broadly the panic. So the pandemic. So some of the key things we did was, firstly, we increased the stop and think wording across all of our customer journeys, just to make sure that people didn't make knee-jerk reactions. We also created a COVID hub where people could go for further information. And the most important thing about that was reflected, you could get that no matter what your life stage, whether that be approaching retirement or earlier, just to give a source where people could go and find help. Pension scams, we did see a slight increase in pension scam activity, unfortunately. So we increased a lot of the wording around pension scams. And then finally, we asked customers to use digital channels where we could, because we really wanted to make sure that we could keep the phone channels for the most vulnerable and those who needed it the most. And they were all critical as we approached it, as we went through the pandemic. So Ross, I guess I wanted to go back to you. I think you outlined, I think really clearly about the range of support that you offer, but what did you see in particular about vulnerability, and how did you as an employer go about supporting that during the pandemic?
I mean, it's a really important point in this, right? Because there was a lot of anxiety and worry amongst the whole, population surrounding, what happened with COVID on many fronts. The first thing we did is to recognise that it's absolutely okay to feel vulnerable. And that came from the very top of our organisation all the way down. It's okay to feel vulnerable. We recognise that people feel more vulnerable now than they may have done previously. We have a mental health online platform and an app which people can go to for support. But also we took advantage of the new virtual ways of working to have more, town halls, more team meetings on a regular basis that are all interactive. And it broke down the barriers between, our senior leaders and everyone, colleagues. So we become more open as a community. We're able to talk about, being vulnerable and what that means, share personal stories. So message of talk more and all able to listen more, because one of the most important things is to stay connected. And what, the lockdown has done is it meant for some people it's more difficult to connect with their, the usual people they wanted to connect with in that point. And from a financial wellness point of view, is to reiterate the messages of, continue to get your pay and benefits as normal. Don't worry about that, and point people in terms of where you can go for financial information on your pensions and engagement online and things like that. But I think the overall message is it's embracing this new virtual world to bring everyone together and stay connected. I mean, just to add, a lot of our colleagues are going into customers' homes and things like that, and a lot of them are vulnerable. So it's natural where we're dealing with vulnerable customers to be, recognise vulnerability in ourselves and to support colleagues in that way.
Yeah, I think it's and in a way maybe COVID has helped to accelerate some of our thinking, because I think embracing vulnerability and understanding that vulnerability has many different shapes and sizes is vital, and then finding ways to interact with each other that is open to acknowledging that vulnerability. And I know at Standard Life we've been doing work for quite a long time now on vulnerability, trying to doing a lot of training to teach our customer-facing colleagues how to recognise vulnerability and how to then offer relevant support. And we did see that was really valuable during the pandemic. So, sometimes what that meant was we enabled the customer-facing colleagues to step out of normal call processes to be able to offer support to our customers. And that might have been pointing them to other relevant support, like the money advice service. But also, sadly, we found sometimes we were directing people to the Samaritans. But I think just understanding that vulnerability comes in all different shapes and sizes, and actually sometimes it's not visible, so you have to pay very close attention. But it sounds like that giving people permission to make that okay, I think is brilliant. And I guess, Sharon, what have you seen in Ireland in relation to vulnerability?
Well, maybe, I suppose, two things, hardship and vulnerability. So we know that, okay, I'll take them separately for a minute because I feel very passionately about the vulnerability part. So let me, on the hardship side, we see that 6% of people who identify as retired continue to work full-time. 18% of people who identify as retired work part-time. And sometimes that's linked with that self-identity, but in 65% of cases, that's about necessity, that people don't have enough in their private pension to cover the cost of living. On vulnerability, I think vulnerability is a huge issue in retirement, and something that we're very passionate about helping people become aware of. A piece of work that we've put through the Second Life study is to ask people, and maybe just have a think about it yourself as well, have a think about somebody you know that has retired really well. And picture that person in your mind and just think for a minute about a couple of those things that you experience in that person you know that lets you know they're living a good life in retirement. And then have a think about somebody in your life who you perceive to be living a bad retirement. And what are the experiences that they've lived through? What are the things they're dealing with day to day that give you those hints that they're not living an optimal retirement? I'm sure there are a huge amount of things that it's very personal, and a lot of things people will have thought about there. But the top 5 answers that come out in the Irish market when we look at people who are living a good life in retirement, number 1 is financial comfort. Number 2 is spending time with people you love. Then it's about spending time on pastimes and hobbies you enjoy. 4th is having an overall sense of purpose. And 5th is continuing to learn and develop and grow. They're the most common things that we perceive in others that tell us that they're living a good life in retirement. On the other side then, when we think of people who are living a bad life in retirement, number 1 is poor physical health. That's followed then by poor mental health. Next is financial poverty, when we think of those heartbreaking sayings like retirees, pensioners having to choose between heating and eating. 4th is chronic loneliness, and that's often caused by the loss of a spouse. And 5th is a complete loss of self-identity. So I think when you think about those things, there's vulnerability in all of them. No amount of money in your pension pot is going to guarantee that you fall into one style of retirement or another. And I also think that COVID has really undermined a lot of the safety that's linked to people's pension plans. So if we think about that good retirement for the people that are continuing to work part-time to increase the money they're living off in retirement, that's undermined by COVID, where people have lost jobs. Spending time with people you love, as lovely as it is to be here with you by Zoom today, it doesn't replace the feeling of grandparents being with their grandchildren and their families. In terms of physical health and mental health, COVID absolutely has an impact on all of that as well, and chronic loneliness. So I think that in all times, we have to address the fact that there's vulnerability in our communities when it comes to retirement. I think at the moment that is kind of more exaggerated and at a higher risk. And we need to explore these themes and make sure that we are talking about these issues now, but also at different points through retirement.
Sharon, thanks for that. And I guess this theme about COVID having almost like an acceleration or bringing to fore some of these attitudes to retirement, I think is fascinating. I'm going to move us on, actually. We'll probably go through this next section reasonably quickly so we can get on, because I can see there's loads of great chat and loads of questions coming in. I'm dead keen to get onto that part. So I think COVID, we've seen a wide range of impact, but there have, I guess, been some positive impacts in terms of it's accelerated new ways of supporting people. And I wanted to explore a bit more of this digital and virtual world. So if I take digital channels first, and I guess before I get into that, I do want to pick up the point I made earlier, which is I think engaging with people on this topic means that you have to be across all channels. You have to be able to talk to people if they want to talk to you on the phone, face to face, read a letter or engage digitally. But pre the pandemic, we saw digital engagement on digital channels increasing, but that definitely accelerated, I think, as people got more used to talking to friends and family on Zoom and also colleagues who were in a virtual world. So we saw around a 72% increase in our mobile app usage year on year up to June 2020, and a 46% increase in our member dashboard usage. And so the mobile app is now our preferred digital channel for customers, which I think is really interesting. But we also enabled secure messaging so that people could transact with us through the mobile app via secure messaging. And we also added update beneficiaries on the mobile app to allow people to do that. And what's interesting, I think, Ross, you talked about that being such a fundamental thing for people to do. It's a huge part of people's wealth, and actually making sure that they have identified the right beneficiaries to ensure that's handed on in line with their wishes. And we find sometimes it's difficult to get people engaged, but interestingly in the pandemic we found more demand for that. And we actually launched a key worker and NHS priority service, and it was heartbreaking, really. Actually, that was one of the most used pieces of functionality, with obviously people thinking about the risks they were running and actually wanting that to be updated. So I think having that digital acceleration, I think, has been great, and I think that will be here to stay. And Ross, I think you talked about the ways of working, but a range of digital channels. So I'm just interested, do you think, to say a bit more about that, and also do you think that will mean a permanent change in how your employees interact?
I think that the first thing to note is we'd already put a lot of our pensions engagement information was already online. So we'd already seen an increased uptake in people using online methods. And in terms of the pension apps as well, already seen that tick up, which is already sort of, that worked well for us, going through COVID, but it's taken a step back outside of pensions. Now we've got, over 20,000 colleagues in the UK, a lot of them working remotely still, and will do for the foreseeable future. We're naturally using things like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all those great things. We're all experts in it, as are our kids, and pets and all that sort of stuff. And what it's meant is we're able to have conversations en masse and disseminate information in a much more efficient, timely manner than we previously had done before as an organisation. We can get a lot of people together, talk about things, and people are much more open now about raising questions, just like we see people are, on this webinar today. Whereas in face-to-face, it was more of a challenge to get everyone together. People might be more afraid of asking a question, but now everyone's a bit more bringing everyone together. So what we can do is we can piggyback on that, new way of working. So from a financial wellness point of view and a pensions point of view, we can use those platforms to sort of engage with people, get out the message, and then some of those platforms are sort of mini, social network platforms within your organisation. Word of mouth spreads. Now we need to be careful that the word of mouth that spreads is the right information, because there's lots of information out there, and us as an employer needs to make sure that the right information on pensions is given to the right people at the right time. But I think it's just, there's a great opportunity for us and all employers to use online communications as a way forward. There is still no substitute for when someone is making an important life decision about pensions for speaking to someone. And there's still a lot of people who like a pensions pack to read through. So you could go absolutely nail on the head. We need to recognise that various different people access information in various ways, and we need to cater for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wanted to pick up on that, like the sort of virtual dealing in the virtual world can be more effective. So we talk about that upcoming stage to retirement being really vital. So one of the things that we do in Standard Life is we'll do face-to-face sessions, face-to-face retirement planning sessions. They were really important to us because we like the chance to be up close and personal with our customers and be able to sort of tailor our advice, our guidance to them. And actually, obviously, with the pandemic, we did do webinars as well, but generally we really liked the face-to-face. So we were really worried about how that was going to translate. But we took them into a virtual world. We also expanded the offering. So we covered retirement, investment, but also estate planning. But we saw really interesting things. So we saw about a 48% increase in attendance at our retirement webinars Q3 this year versus Q3 last year. So more people were attending. And if we actually look at the results from the survey about whether people felt they were better informed after it, still really high rates. So over between 80 and 90%, depending on the webinar, saying that they felt better informed. So I think that's really interesting to see that virtual events can be more effective, and they might be here to stay. So, but I'm just going to wrap up actually, because we've got tons of, it's been really great engagement, tons of questions, so I want to get to those. But I guess I just wanted to say a couple of words to summarise that. So financial wellness for the over 50s is one of the more complex phases as people plan for retirement. And I think the discussion's shown is actually it's a diverse topic, and COVID has had the impact of accelerating and having negative and positive impacts. And actually, I think even, fingers crossed we'll get a vaccine next year. But I think some of these impacts we're going to see that be in place for quite a long time. But next I'm gonna open to questions. So you've all been using definitely the chat and the Q&A. So I'm going to start with the Q&A, but you can also raise your hand, and then I think Angela will let you in, and you can just you can ask us directly. But I'll go to the first question in the Q&A, and I think the question is, what are the latest fintech innovations you've seen that can make a real difference in retirement planning, financial wellness, and more generally, what do you see the role of technology in addressing these challenges? So I guess I'll give my view. I've had the advantage because I've got the time. I've been looking at some of the Q&A, so I've done a bit of thinking. There's loads of fintech activity. I suppose I do think there's more we can do for this age group and this population. So I think there's more innovation that we can see. And if there's anyone on the call who wants to sort of raise their hand and give us their thoughts, but we do see I think activity activity in that space. So I expect it to be an area that develops, and and I think we need to see more activity in that space. But I guess Sharon, Ross, any thoughts from you on that topic?
Just a thought I had, a trend that we worked with Foresight Factory early in the pandemic to understand what were some of the big trends that we might see that we needed to prepare for. And a key one that came through is about presence-free interaction. So, pre-pandemic, we had more and more choices as consumers of whether we show up in person or whether we show up digitally, whether that's working from home, doing our groceries online, whatever that is. The pandemic has made us all step into that zone and embrace it. And the longer that we spend in an environment where we are socially distanced, the more this will become part of the norm, and the less and less people will want to return to face-to-face interactions. They absolutely predict that when restrictions ease, people will rush back to social gatherings, but people will be much more thoughtful about when they give their presence face-to-face. So we've been trying to learn from others in that space, and that's one of those the things that we did with the end of career guidance counsellor, is make sure that all of the interactions we're building are digital interactions. So our end of career guidance counsellor has been having video Zoom calls with retirees. We're recording those so that we can create them into content series that we can send out by e-zine. We'll be inviting people to webinars. So we're really trying to embrace, I suppose, the best of what other companies are doing out there and try and wrap that into an offering that will support retirees. But we've a huge amount to grow and learn, I think, as an industry in this area.
We definitely, so in Standard Life, we work with a range of fintechs actually to try and to help people. So if there's anybody out there in the call that you have an interesting and innovative idea, please do get in touch following this.
And just for my thoughts on fintech, if I put them into two buckets, those which sort of bring lots of someone's financial information together in a very succinct way, and those who are building, using things like AI and machine learning to help people make financial decisions. We've seen a lot of innovation, and naturally as an employer, we're looking to see what the market is out there. There's a lot of fintechs working on some great stuff. I suppose the caution I have is in terms of, we've got open banking, which is great, bringing everything together. But for those fintech and apps and platforms to really work, it really needs to be very tailored to the individual, and people need to engage with it. But there's still, to engage with it, you need to be comfortable of sharing a lot of personal data, number one. So are we there yet? Not sure. And then secondly, from the AI machine learning, this is basically, it helps you understand what your needs are, and then sort of a bit like robo advice, if you like, sort of gives a bit of a steer of what your decision might be. Is it evolved enough that it gives the right answer at the right time? I still think it's slightly too early, but it's going on the right direction, and some really interesting developments to see.
Yeah, and Ross, I'm going to bring in a comment from the chat, which I think is kind of linked to this. That you need to be able to have some face-to-face dialogue, and you need to know the individual. I think there was a question about young people potentially getting all their advice from family and friends. My opinion is actually I don't think it's just young people. I think that's just everybody. And actually, so I think this question of advice, when do people need advice, when do people need guidance, I think it's really important. So digital tools will help, and innovation in that space, but you'll always need to then potentially to give some face-to-face or telephone guidance so that you can actually talk to someone. Again, things like identifying vulnerability, sometimes can't do that through digital tools. And then obviously for a subset, then advice will be the best fit for them. So
from an employer's perspective, I think we have a responsibility to guide people in the right direction of, where can they go for the right information, educate them on what's, guidance and what's advice, because it is great that people talk to their friends and family, but sometimes, everyone feels like, I give my advice here and there, but it's important that people understand, get the right information to make an informed choice. So I feel like employers have a role and responsibility to just signpost in the right place.
I think we've got a question. I think I may have answered this. So Ross, you mentioned about employees encouraging them to complete death in service expression of wish. And I think the question was, have we seen an increase in this? So I think the answer is yes, we've seen an increase. Is it fast enough? No, it's still an area that we really need to encourage people more. And And obviously we see actually the end state when we're trying to sort through people's estates, and actually it can be very complex. So it's such a simple and easy thing to do. So I think we still need to see more of it. But Ross, I guess you probably spend time trying to encourage your employees to do that. So how?
Yes, so sadly we've seen cases far too often where expression of wish form hasn't been completed, and then go through the challenges of deciding what needs to be done with that money. But we've run things like giving vouchers, Amazon vouchers for people for this period of time. Those who put their expression of wish form can get this golden ticket to win this vouchers, and that did drive up engagement considerably. And it's a constant theme on the end of all pensions communications saying, don't forget to update your expression of wish. It's so simple to do. It's all online. You can do it. And then secondly, actually, will writing. So we provide legal service for one of our partners. And actually, at the moment, for example, we're running if you go and engage and think about writing a will before the end of November, again, you could be entered into to win some vouchers. So there's some little nudges like that. They do actually work to get engagement up. It's just really important that people think about it.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the next question, and hopefully, Angela, I'm finding it difficult to scroll through them, so I'm hoping if we get them to answer, the next ones will come up. But I think it says that our pensions are invested in stocks and things. Do we think consumers are aware of the link, and has the FTSE drop caused a change in behaviour? So I think hopefully, yes, absolutely. I think that market volatility had a big impact. I guess the question to people, I think people understand that they're invested in stocks and shares. I'm not sure if you asked a group of people whether they're investors, and actually I think there was some research done by sort of Yes You Can, the Wellcome Foundation, asking women particularly, trying to get them to sort of invest more in pensions and asking them if they thought they were investors, and most everybody kept their hands down, but then when asked, do you have a pension, they put their hands up. And personally, I think partly the move to sustainable investing and ESG, I think actually that may be a way to get people engaged in actually, where their pension funds are. But I think probably not. Their awareness is quite low. But when there's volatility in the market, then people do really worry. But I guess panelists, any thoughts to add to that?
I wonder, Cyrus, if in Ireland there's maybe more of an education gap. So I think this is a really difficult area to research, and it is a question we ask through our surveys. But you can never really be quite sure where people are trying to be maybe appear overly positive and overly a better understanding in the surveys. Because what we see is stuff like 51% of people with a pension in Ireland don't know that there's tax-free cash at the end of it. Now I'm aware that our structures are very different. 40% of people know they're saving in a pensions pot, but don't know that they'll have a choice at the end of that of different routes to take. And 58% of people are really uncomfortable making any financial decisions about their pension. So in a lot of cases, they might have a pension that might be through their employer. There's a cohort that really know inside out where their pension is invested, how it's invested, how that vehicle works. But there's a huge lack of understanding, and I think it's really important for all of us to help people understand and break the pension down into, I think even Ross, the way you described it earlier on about 350 and what that leads to, it's those kind of terms that I think will help a greater mass of people have that better understanding.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to the point of, the more you put in, the more you get out. And yes, investment is where it's invested is a very important point, but it's a long-term, it's a long-term investment. And do I believe that people understand it's in stocks and shares? Probably. Most people, as we know, will just not self-select. Their money will just be in the default fund that's chosen from the provider or the trustees. I think an important point is for those approaching retirement to understand that if they don't do anything, to understand the phasing of their fund from more risky stocks and shares to something that's more less risky, and therefore to define. It's really important to think about what you want your retirement date to be, because the sooner you do that, the earlier it will start to move from more risky to less risky. So I think it's more of an important thing to engage with the closer you get to retirement, where you're less able to make up any shortfalls in your funds because of market volatility.
And Ross, I think that's really important. We definitely saw a spike in people switching during that sort of April-May period from more risky to less risky, and clearly trying to get people to think about not doing things knee-jerk in the short term. But listen, we're running out of time, so I think we've got time for one more question. So I'm gonna go to the one which is a regulatory framework suitable for things like engagement, nudges, and help with big decisions? I guess it's interesting. I was sitting with our independent governance committee yesterday, where we were looking at we'd been doing some consumer research on their annual report, because they were keen to be that to be as engaging as possible. And I guess one of the things we found was actually there was a conflict between what we had to cover from a regulatory perspective and actually what people wanted to see. You know, people really just wanted to see 2 pages, simple. So I think there is it's sometimes in terms of written communications, riders and waivers and things that you have to include. So but I think that's a challenge. I think that with digital channels and different ways of engaging, we need to seek to work around. But I guess Ross, Sharon, any thoughts on that subject?
So from my side, I think the regulations, probably they'll keep evolving. Of course, we want it's challenging for us as an industry if the regulations keep changing to keep up pace, of course. But I think they've got the best interest at heart. And to Gail's point, the challenge is when they make things more complex and more onerous, what people want is just simple engagement, simple information. Otherwise you just lose interest in them. I would say the work the FCA has done around IFA advice at retirements, and in particular the risks of people transferring when they shouldn't from DB to DC, is an important thing. And I think it's going in the right direction. In terms of helping people understand those complexities. And the issue becomes, if robo advice really takes off, how you put that into a regulatory framework to make sure that's still fit for purpose, I think.
And our regulatory framework in Ireland is quite different, but I suppose that's the great thing about being part of a bigger group within Standard Life and the Phoenix Group, that we're able to take the best of the learnings from our colleagues in the UK, like nudge communications, coming up to milestone birthdays, and look at how we bring that into a CRM strategy in the Irish market to really help people think about retirement.
Well, listen, thanks. And that's unfortunately, we're out of time. So I guess I wanted to just wrap up by saying thanks so much to everybody on the call for engaging. I know we didn't get through all the questions, but some great chat and some great questions. I'd like to say thank you to our panelists. So Ross, Sharon, thanks so much. What brilliant and diverse perspective. So I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that those of you in the audience have also enjoyed it. And look forward to doing this again sometime. So thanks very much.
Thank you.